Okay, this is the PowerPoint related to cameras. Again, this is something you may want to look at before or as you are planning your video narrative because there is information here related to different types of shots you can use and really kind of the procedures, the steps that you can go through to shoot good video. There's also part of it is going to be about lighting, specifically 3-point lighting, something that we talked about in the last lab that we were in before all of the new changes. So this is something that you should look at as you are shooting your video or even before you start shooting your video narrative. First thing is a reminder of how to focus. Again, we talked about this in the last lab. There are 3 steps to focusing. First thing, zoom all the way in on the subject or the object, and I mean all the way in. If it's a person, you may be zooming in on the face or the skin or a shirt or something like that, but you want to go all the way in to make sure that you get the exact distance. This is when you focus. So you focus up the camera, make it as sharp as you possibly can. Then zoom out and get your shot. Now, the thing that you have to remember is that you should be doing this all the time. Anytime the object or a subject moves or the camera moves. Because remember, focus is determined by the distance between the camera and the object or the subject. If either one of them moves, the focus changes and you have to refocus. This should become instinct. Anytime you're using a camera, whether it is a remote camera or a studio camera, anytime the camera moves, anytime the object moves, always refocus and do it very quickly. It was particularly in a studio because you may only have a couple of seconds before you come back out on air, and your shot may be on air very quickly. So make it instinct. Every time, as soon as you come to a camera, you automatically just go ahead and refocus. Actually shooting a shot is a process as well. It's something that you need to understand how to do in order to get good video that you want to include in your project and you want others to see. Too many people who have never had any kind of instruction and any kind of understanding of how to shoot video, they just kind of point and shoot, and too much of what they shoot turns out to be crap. So going through a specific process is the best way to get the best video that you want for the editing, because you want lots of different shots. You want to give yourself a variety of different shots, but you also want the best shots so that your project looks very good. So when you are preparing to shoot, go through your focus procedure, set up the camera, find the object that you want, the subject that you want, do the zoom in, focus, and then zoom out and get your shot. That's the first thing you always do. Second, when you do set up the last thing you do in the focusing process is you actually set up your shot, get your shot. Where do you want the object in the picture? Once you get to that, once you set up your shot, then start the recording. And then let go of the camera if it's on a tripod, or hold the camera and do not stop recording for at least 15 seconds. And I mean at least 15 seconds. 20 seconds is better. 28 seconds is better. Okay, because what you want is one good, long, steady shot, because then you can take whatever portion of that good shot that you have and include that into your recording. But the key here is not to move, not to zoom, not to pan or tilt or anything. Set the camera up, turn on the recording, and let go of it. Leave it alone. Don't touch it for at least 15 seconds. then stop the recording and set up your next shot. Again, like I said, too many people, when they've never done this before or they are getting a camera for the first time, they just kind of turn on the recording, maybe zoom in on something, focus up, zoom out, hold that shot for 5 seconds, move over, pan over to something else for 5 seconds, pan over to something else for 10 seconds, and they think they've got 3 good shots when actually they've got 25 seconds of crap. Okay? Go through this. Make sure that you get good shots. Also, get a variety of shots. You want a bunch of different shots. You want a close-up, you want a medium shot, you want a wide shot of the same thing. You want a variety because this gives you more editing flexibility. So let's start talking about the cameras here. The cameras, again, we went through this on a little bit on the first lab or the last lab that we were in. There are basically 2 types of cameras, the studio cameras and then the ENG and the EFP cameras. This first type of camera we talked about again in lab, the studio cameras. Studio cameras are big, they're bulky, they're very expensive. They're used by large networks for really kind of in controlled environments like studios. You do see them sometimes at sporting events. Again, big networks have money. They can use these cameras in different kinds of environments, but usually in TV stations, they keep them in their control rooms. They're on pedestals. They're controlled, or they're connected to the control rooms, and so they're kept in this environment. They have very good images. They create very good images. They have very good video. But they're, like I say, they're very expensive. They can be $100,000, but that's what larger markets and studios are looking for. The other cameras are the cameras that we have in our studio. They are called ENG or EFP cameras. ENG stands for electronic news gathering. These are the cameras that are used by news crews to go out into the community and shoot video, but they're also used in commercial field production, EFP, electronic field production. It used to be that advertisers, people who wanted to make commercials, would bring their products into a TV studio where they would use the regular studio cameras. Now with technology beyond that, being more portable, EFP cameras go into the vendors, the merchants' shops, and shoot video there and get very good images to use in their commercials. ENG and EFP cameras are designed to be portable. They're designed to be used for remote shooting. So like I say, for news, they go out into the community and shoot video related to news stories, or go to merchants' shops and shoot video for commercial production. That doesn't mean that they can't be used in television studios. Many TV stations, particularly medium and smaller markets, use these cameras as their studio cameras so that they can be set up to be connected to a control room and are used as the primary cameras for shooting in-studio videos. So what we're going to be looking at here is, like I said, again, in the lab, I'm going to look at these shooting video, looking at cameras according to the lenses and the viewfinders. The lens really determines the capabilities of the camera. The more sophisticated the lens is, the more the camera can see and record. So whatever the ability of the lens, what kind of how closely it can zoom into an object, how wide the lens is, that is what the camera is going to see and be able to record or send to a control room. The viewfinder, on the other hand, is related to the composition of the image. What kinds of content does the photographer, the camera operator, want to create within the image? What kind of a message does the photographer want to send? So the viewfinder is more related to the composition of the image and the message that's being conveyed. So first thing what we need to look at is language, terminology. What sort of language is used related to lenses and their use? First, the iris. The iris is really that mechanism within the lens that determines how much light enters the camera. Think of your own eyes. Your eyes have irises in them. The wider the iris is, the more open the iris is, the more light that's going to be coming in. The smaller the iris is, the less amount of light that is going to be coming into the camera. Now, how you determine how much light is coming in is the unit of measurement that is used, and that is the f-stop. Some of you who have done still photography should know about f-stops. That is that the smaller the number, the wider the opening the iris is, and that means the more light is in there. The other end, the larger the number, the smaller the hole is, and then the less light there is allowed into the camera. This is what's known as an inverse relationship. Normally, we would expect with a larger number that the iris would be open all the way, and so that the hole in the iris would be much larger, and more light would be coming through. And then the opposite would be true. The smaller the number, the smaller the hole, the less light. But it's inverse. It is different than what we would expect. Why, I don't know. It's just the fact that at an f22, the iris hole is much smaller, therefore less light is coming in. At a smaller number, f1.4, the wider the hole, the more light that's coming in. It can sound confusing, it can be confusing, it is confusing, but that is the way it is. So you need to understand that inverse relationship, recognize that inverse relationship, and that smaller means small number means big hole, large number means small hole. Another term to be familiar with, and one that I will use a lot, is frame. The frame is what the camera actually sees through the lens. That outside box that is the limit around the image. Now, the image itself can be wide or it can be much narrower or focused, but the frame basically stays the same. It is that outside limit around whatever image the lens is focusing on. Now, how big that image is within the frame is determined by the focal length. The focal length determines how much of the scene in front of the lens actually can be seen within the frame from a fixed position. And as you might suspect, these can have different sizes. They're always measured in millimeters. That is a 24 millimeter lens or a 500 millimeter lens. So at 50 millimeters, what would be considered normal, basically the image that we see is what our eyes see. How would something a subject or an object look like if we were just looking at the object with our eyes. 50 millimeter, 55 millimeter is really kind of the normal focal length. But then you can have a narrow focal length. That is, the lens has zoomed in on the object, making it bigger within the frame and actually look as if we are very close to the object. When in reality, the camera has stayed the same place, but the object looks bigger and closer. That is a type of lens that has a large number to it, a 500 millimeter or a 250 millimeter or 1,000 millimeter or a 1,500 millimeter lens. The larger the number, the closer we look, and actually the narrower, the less we see of the object. And then the opposite is true. If we bring in a wide angle lens, you'll see not only the object, but you'll see much of the area around the object. And the object itself looks further away and looks smaller. The number millimeter lens that we have here is a smaller number, 28 millimeter lens, 35 millimeter lens. Again, smaller the number, the wider the angle of the focal length. Again, like the iris and f-stops, this is an inverse relationship. The number of the lens, either a 28 millimeter lens or a 500 millimeter lens, the smaller the number, the wider the scene. The larger the number, the more focused, the narrower the scene of the focal length. Okay, so again, the idea, it's just not intuitive. It just doesn't seem right, doesn't seem natural. Large numbers should show larger images or wider scope of something. But it isn't. It's an inverse relationship again. So the larger the number, the more focused, the narrower the image is going to be, the smaller the number, and therefore the wider the angle of the lens. Zooming is another technique that can be used in creating shots with your lens. Zooming, I'm sure you all are familiar with this. When you are zooming in on something, when you zoom in on something, you're keeping the camera in the same place, but you're making the object in the frame look smaller or larger or closer or further away. Okay, but the idea here is that the camera stays in the same place, and zooming in or zooming out changes the size of the object or what looks like a change of distance between the camera and the object. How big an object can look in the frame is determined by how many times it can be magnified. That is, and again, that determines the power of the zoom lens, and that's indicated by X. So if we just looked at the object without the zoom lens, that would be the normal shot, and it would be really 1X. It is just what it would look like with our eyes. But if you wanted to make the image 20 times bigger, then you would have a 20X lens. What it's doing is taking that normal shot and it is making it 20 times bigger than it would normally look. Zoom lenses are determined according to this. Some are 16X, meaning they would only make it 16 times bigger. Others are 25X or 30X, making it an object look 25 to 30 times bigger than it would its normal shot. So the higher the number, the further away the object can be from the camera while the camera is staying in the same place and making the image look larger in the frame. So like I say, 20X zoom lenses are going to make the image bigger than a 16x zoom lens, whereas a 30x zoom lens is going to make the image bigger than a 20x zoom lens. The importance of the act of zooming itself has changed over the decades. Years ago, you didn't want the audience to see the lens zooming in on an object of some sort. Rather, you would go to a different shot. The camera operator would zoom in, get a closer shot of the object or subject, and then go back to that shot. Now, the act of zooming has become actually an effect, and you can zoom in on an object or a subject with the purpose of creating a particular effect. Doing quick zooms, doing fast zooms, very often a series of quick zooms, creates excitement, creates energy with the image, but it can also create a level of tension, gets the attention of the viewer. You're seeing something that you don't normally see, and so you're paying more attention to it. Slow zooms, on the other hand, are not trying to get the audience's attention. You see these most often in interviews where the person who's being interviewed might become more emotional, might have some sort of begin to cry or become angry, and the slow zoom really is applied to focus your attention as an audience member strictly on the face. So you may go from a head and shoulders shot to a very slow zoom into just the person's face, so that you can see the emotion in the person's face and in turn have some empathy for that person and whatever emotional response that person is having. So now let's look at some terminology related to viewfinders. The viewfinder is really just a small monitor on the camera. In the studio cameras, it's of course much larger. It's going to be about 4 inches, 5 inches on the diagonal, and you can look at this little viewfinder with both eyes. But on the ENG or EFP cameras, the viewfinder is mounted on the left side of the camera so that when you put the camera on your right shoulder, it is your right eye, usually only your right eye, that can see it. And this really is a question of your master eye. Some of us are left master-eyed, some of us are right master-eyed. And the way you determine this is you hold your arm straight out and with your thumb pointing up, and then as you're looking at your thumb with both eyes open, put your thumb on some object, like the clock on the wall or a picture or something. So as you are looking at your thumb is on that particular object. Now close your left eye and then close your right eye, and then whichever eye your thumb did not move, stayed on that object, that's your master eye. The problem, of course, with the ENG camera viewfinders is that they are built primarily for right master-eyed people, even though some of us are left master-eyed. But that's okay. You can deal with that. I've seen lots of professional photographers who will kind of look through the viewfinder who are left-eyed and look through the viewfinder with their right eye, but then they'll just kind of lean over, move their head over, and then look through the viewfinder with their left master eye, and they can still get good shots. And of course, as we talked about before, looking at the viewfinder, we're going to be looking at really the composition of the image. And this is in the hands of the photographer, the person who's running the camera. What kind of message, what sort of composition do you want in the message? And the terms that we will use will really kind of include the word shot, wide shot, medium shot, um, long shots, two shots. So this word will be very often in the terminology that we use. Terms related to the viewfinder, one is field of view, and this is really how much of what is in front of the camera is in the viewfinder, actually in the frame. Again, going back to some terms we used with the lens, normal field of view is what your eyes see without any sort of aid from a lens or from a camera. Okay, so a normal field of view is basically what your eyes see generally. But then a wider field of view is, again, what's seen in the viewfinder. It will include what you see with your eyes, but really you can kind of look at it as including your peripheral vision as well. And this, of course, we would call a wide shot. Another term that's become more prevalent in television nowadays is aspect ratio. And this is really the dimensions of the frame, how many units wide by how many units high. Standard definition is 4 units by 3 units. And if you look at the top picture here, you'll see it's got 3 units at the 3 units wide by 4 units high. This is wrong. This came out of your textbook, and I hope they've changed it by now. It's actually 4 units long by 3 units high. But that's standard definition television. They started with that because really it's kind of a cast over from film. Film originally was shot on 35 millimeter film, which is about this dimension. So when television became more prominent and film became part of the television programming, the aspect ratio fit perfectly into the television standard definition. But nowadays, pretty much all televisions are in the 16 by 9. Simply because that is the standard for high definition. So 16 by 9 is a wider screen, 16 units wide by 9 units high. This really also can be called widescreen. This was a new kind of technology that film tried in order to get more people back into the theaters in the 1950s. And it now has become, as high definition, it has become the standard for standard dimensions for television nowadays. Now we're going to look at really kind of the basic shots, the basic screenshots that you find in both television and film. They're the extra wide shot, the wide shot, the medium wide shot, the medium shot, the medium close-up, and the close-up, and then the extreme close-up. Extreme wide shots really include the object or the subject and an extensive area around the object or subject. In filmmaking, these are often called establishing shots because they are very wide. Sometimes they're called vista shots. The idea here is that you are establishing the place, the area where the action for the next scene that's coming up, where that action is going to take place. The next is the wide shot, and this is really kind of moving in a little bit closer to the object so that you include the entire object but less of the surrounding area. A medium wide shot, again, is moving in a little bit closer on the object or the subject. Sometimes these are called knee shots, meaning that at the bottom of the frame, the subject is cut off there at the knees. So it includes just 2/3 to 3/4 of the object of the subject. The medium shot then is about half of the object. Again, we're moving closer into the object or the subject. So the object is getting larger in the frame. The medium close-up then is sometimes called the bust shot. This includes a third to a quarter of the object. And again, if it is a subject, if it's a person, it's usually about mid-torso that is the end of the bottom of the frame. Then the close-up shot, sometimes it's called the tight shot. This includes basically just head and shoulders. These are usually the close-up shots when you have dialogue in films, or you have, this is the shot that's used for anchors in newscasts. So again, all you're including is the shoulders and the head of the subject. And then the extreme close-up, which is usually, again, if it's a subject, it is just the face of the person. Again, this is kind of the where a slow zoom would end. It would start with a head and shoulder shot, and then a slow zoom would end with an extreme close-up, seeing only the face of the person. So again, you get the viewer gets the full weight of the emotion that the person is going through. Also need to understand the difference between a close-up shot and a long shot. A close-up shot, and really this whole thing has to do with where the camera is with respect to the object or the subject. A close-up shot means that the camera is actually close up to the object or subject. On the other hand, a long shot means that the camera stays in one place and zooms in, so it looks as if the object is closer or larger, but in reality, the camera hasn't moved. It has only zoomed in and made the object look as if it has gotten closer to the camera. So this is the end of the first part of the camera's PowerPoint. The next part will deal with contents of shots, and then we'll talk about specifically lighting and three-point lighting that we went over in the last lab.